A Hamas delegation meets in Cairo to discuss the ceasefire agreement and a phased detainee exchange. Gaza faces extreme shortage of essential supplies as Israel blocks food, fuel, and medicine deliveries for 7 days. Syrian Defense Ministry announces the resumption of military operations in coastal Syria after temporary halt. It's 10 a.m. Cairo local time, and I'm Sam Al-Fi, and you're watching Q News, and we begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. A Hamas delegation has met in Cairo to discuss the ceasefire agreement and the phased detainee exchange. During the talks, the delegation praised Egypt's role, particularly in opposing displacement plans, and welcomed the Arab initiative for Gaza action. Hamas called for full implementation of the agreement, the reopening of crossings, and an unrestricted aid into Gaza. Support committee until Palestinian reconciliation is achieved. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has confirmed that Israel will send a delegation to Doha to advance ceasefire negotiations. Meanwhile, Hamas spokesman Abdel Latif El-Qannou expressed optimism about progress in the second phase of ceasefire talks, highlighting ongoing mediation efforts by Egypt and Qatar. The Egyptian State Information Service stated that Cairo is engaging in intensive talks with all parties to expedite progress on the second phase of the truce, with high-level Egyptian meetings involving Hamas, US, and Qatari officials continuing. Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom have voiced their support for an Arab-backed plan aimed at rebuilding Gaza. In a joint statement, the foreign ministers described the plan as a realistic path to Gaza's reconstruction, stating that if implemented, it could bring rapid and sustainable improvements to the dire living conditions of the Palestinians. The plan, drafted by Egypt and endorsed by the Arab leaders, has been rejected by Israel and the US President Donald Trump, who has proposed an alternative vision that critics say could lead to the displacement of the Palestinian people. The United Nations has accused Israel of carrying out a genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people across all territories since 1967. The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, stressed that any attempt to separate Gaza from the West Bank is an illusion. She further stated that Israel's objective is to erase the concept of Palestinian existence in the occupied territories while advancing the expansion of what is referred to as Greater Israel. Gaza is facing a severe shortage of essential supplies after 7 days of Israel blocking all deliveries of food, fuel, and medicine, with basic goods becoming increasingly scarce and unaffordable. Many Palestinians now rely solely on humanitarian aid for survival. The nations and other nations have warned of an imminent famine crisis. Earlier, the World Food Programme stated that its food supplies in Gaza are only enough to keep public kitchens and bakeries running for less than 2 weeks. The death toll in the Gaza Strip has now risen to 48,453, the majority of whom are women and children, since the start of the Israeli offensive in October 2023. According to medical sources, the number of injuries has also climbed to 111,860, while thousands remain trapped under the rubble as rescue efforts continue to face significant challenges. In the past 48 hours, hospitals across Gaza have received 7 more fatalities, including 6 newly reported cases and 1 body recovered from the rubble. And Palestinians in the occupied West Bank city of Nablus have cleaned up a historic mosque a day after it was set on fire during an Israeli army raid. The Palestinian Ministry of Endowments and Religious Affairs stated that the fire was deliberately started by the Israeli forces during the raid. Local religious authorities reported that the Israeli army raided 6 mosques in the city on March the 7th, the first Friday of Ramadan. And 3 Palestinians have been injured by Israeli fire on Salahuddin Street in the Gaza Strip. Israeli opened fire on civilians near El Shohada on Salahuddin Street. Meantime, a Palestinian was injured by the Israeli gunfire in the town of Abbasan El Jadida, east of Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Israeli occupation forces have detained a journalist from Al Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied Jerusalem. According to reports, the journalist was arrested earlier this week from his home in the Silwan neighborhood during iftar time. Of incitement on social media. And Israeli forces have fired 5 bullets and stun grenades during a raid on the village of Burqa, west of Nablus, in the northern occupied. Soldiers closed military checkpoints south of the occupied West Bank, preventing thousands of Palestinians from reaching their homes. They also closed entrances to several Palestinian villages near Bethlehem and in Beit Rima near Ramallah. Israeli forces seized a number of Palestinian vehicles. And the Israeli aggression on the northern West Bank province of Tulkarm has entered its 42nd consecutive day. Israeli forces have reinforced their presence, displacing over 21,000 from Tulkarm and Nur. The UNRWA calls the camps uninhabitable, marking the worst assault since the Second Intifada and the largest West Bank displacement since 1967, with 40,000 forced to flee. And Israeli forces are continuing their offensive in Jenin in the occupied West for consecutive. The Palestinian Information Center reported that Israeli forces are preventing mosques in the Jenin refugee camp from broadcasting the call to prayer, despite it being the holy month of Ramadan. The Israeli operation in Jenin began January the 21st, days after the ceasefire in Gaza, with dozens killed, hundreds of homes destroyed, and thousands of families displaced. And thousands of Israeli protesters have gathered in front of the Defense Ministry in Tel Aviv to push the government to secure a detainee deal with Hamas. Israel and Hamas signaled they were preparing for the next phase of ceasefire negotiations as mediators pushed ahead with talks to extend the fragile 42-day truce that began in January. The Gaza ceasefire deal that took effect in January calls for the remaining 59 hostages in Hamas captivity to be freed in a second phase, during which final plans would be negotiated for an end to the war. And relatives of the Israeli detainees have warned of an imminent restart of fighting in Gaza if the second phase of the ceasefire deal is not completed. The families gathered in Tel Aviv ahead of two planned protests to demand the return of all detainees. The first phase of the Gaza ceasefire ended early in March. Since then, Israel And now we move on to the latest developments in Syria. The Syrian Defense Ministry has announced the resumption of military operations in Syria after a temporary halt. The Defense Ministry asserted that the situation is fully under control and urging civilians to return home. The ministry confirmed an agreement with community leaders for the surrender of wanted individuals and their weapons, allowing security forces to enter and take control. Syria's Ministry of Education has announced of classes in Tartus and Latakia on Sunday and Monday due to ongoing security instability. Additionally, Homs University postponed all remaining exams this week, rescheduling them for March the 16th. Reports indicate that in over 600 deaths following Thursday's attacks by forces linked to the former Bashar al-Assad regime against the transitional government's military. The Israeli military has announced strikes and ground operations targeting locations in Syria. The Israeli military said it will continue its defensive activities to protect Israel and its residents. Reports from Damascus indicate that Israeli forces are advancing towards Rasm al-Halabi village in central Hitra in southern Syria. A Lebanese citizen has been killed and another was injured following an Israeli Tishbeil district of the Nabatea government. Israeli warplanes launched a series of airstrikes on several villages in southern Lebanon, targeting areas such as Jabal al-Rihan, Zibqin, and Yatir. And Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has announced the U.S. of tactics, and a day after President Donald Trump said he had sent a letter to the country's top authority to negotiate a nuclear deal. Khamenei has said that the aim of Washington's offer for negotiations was domination rather than problem solving. Despite expressing an openness to a deal with Tehran, Trump has reinstated the maximum pressure campaign that was applied during his first term in the White House to isolate Iran from the global economy and drive its oil exports to zero. Tehran insists its nuclear work is solely for peaceful purposes. And the White House has stated that Iran can be addressed either militarily or through a negotiated agreement. This statement follows remarks from Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, asserting that Iran will not be forced into negotiations. The White House added Washington hopes Iran prioritize its people and national interests over terrorism. Meanwhile, Trump reiterated his desire for a nuclear agreement with Iran, revealing that he sent a letter to Iranian leadership expressing South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has walked out of a detention center after prosecutors decided not to appeal a court decision to cancel the impeached leader's arrest warrant on insurrection charges. Yoon, 64, remains suspended from his duties, and his criminal and impeachment trials continue over his short-lived imposition of the martial law on December the 3rd. The Seoul Central District Court cancelled Yoon's arrest warrant, citing the timing of his indictment and questions about the legality of the investigation process. In his impeachment trial, the Constitutional Court is expected to decide in the coming days whether to reinstate or remove Yoon. Russia and Ukraine have both claimed that their forces attacked each other's energy facilities. Russia struck Ukrainian energy facilities targeting sites supporting military airfields and enterprises. Earlier, Russian forces linked to Ukraine's defense ministry an oil refinery in Russia's Leningrad Oblast, damaging at least one tank, and the refinery is among Russia's largest. A Russian strike on a town in Ukraine's embattled Donetsk region has killed at least 11 people. This comes as a wave of heavy aerial attacks continued into the second night following a U.S. decision to stop sharing satellite images with Ukraine. Ukraine's state emergency service said a Russian drone damaged a Ukrainian fire truck while rescuers fought to extinguish the burning buildings. And Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said Russia fired 2 ballistic missiles into the center of the town of Dobropilya, then launched a further strike which hit while rescuers were responding to the first strikes. Zelensky sent his condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims. Another 7 people were killed in 4 towns close to the front, where Russian troops have been making steady advances. 3 others died when a Russian drone hit a civilian workshop in the northeastern Kharkiv region.
Працівник ДСНС України. Повторний удар відбувся, коли почали працювати рятувальники. Поранено 50 людей. Усім надано.
And now we move to Rahim Morsi in our newsroom.
Thank you so much, Salma.
Economic News.
Thank you so much, Salma, for introducing me. We now move on to the economic news, where we read when it comes to financial and economic news. Microsoft is ramping up its investments in South Africa, committing to an additional $296.8 million by 2027 to expand its cloud and artificial intelligence infrastructure. Speaking at an event in Johannesburg, Microsoft Vice Chair and President Brad Smith announced that the company will fund technical certification exams for 50,000 individuals in high-demand digital skills, including cloud architecture, AI, and cybersecurity. The tech giant has already invested about $1,125 million to establish South Africa's first enterprise-grade center and Cape Town, with the country emerging as a major hub for AI-driven data centers. Aims to meet rising demand for its Azure cloud services across the region.
Build out and provide even more data center capacity.
DHL has announced plans to cut 8,000 jobs in its Post and Parcel Germany division as part of its Fit for Growth strategy, aiming to save over €1 billion by 2027. The layoffs, over 1% of its global workforce, follow a 7.2% drop in annual operating profit. DHL Group employs approximately 602,000 people across more than 220 countries and territories worldwide, including 190,000 in its Post and Parcel Germany unit. DHL reported €5.89 billion in 2024 earnings before interest and tax, slightly surpassing analyst expectations. And now we go back to Selma in our studio.
And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here's what we have been covering. A Hamas delegation discussed the ceasefire agreement and the fate. Gaza faces extreme shortage of essential supplies as Israel blocks food, fuel, and medicine deliveries for 7 days. Syrian Defense Ministry announces resumption of military operations in coastal Syria after a temporary halt. And this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. And don't forget to follow Qnews on Instagram and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.